They put the children's shelters on the target list first. High Marshal Korvac said it like he was reading the weather, one claw resting on the glass map of Port Haven, the small human colony turning slowly beneath his flagship in soft blue and gold. 900 ships of the Threxian Dominion hung above the planet like a wall of midnight, their engines cold, their weapons quiet, their confidence absolute. On the main display, Port Haven looked harmless. A few domed neighborhoods, a farm belt outside the city, a hospital with a red cross painted on the roof because humans still believed symbols mattered. Korvac did not. Civilian pressure breaks civilian governments, he said. Earth will surrender by morning. Around him, his officers clicked their approval. They had been raised on stories about humanity, the little death world species that smiled too much, apologized too quickly, and built ugly ships out of thick steel because they did not understand elegance. Humans were stubborn, yes. Useful sometimes, but not dangerous. Not here. Not against the Grand Fleet. Then one green icon vanished from the tactical wall. It was a destroyer on the far left of the formation, nothing important, one ship among hundreds. The sensor officer leaned forward. Signal loss from Spear 7, Marshal. Korvac did not turn his head. Debris interference. Yes, Marshal. 10 seconds later, 4 more icons went dark. Not damaged. Not retreating. Just gone, as if someone had pinched out the lights. Korvac's jaw tightened. Find the source. The officer ran the scan again, deeper this time, sweeping 2 million miles of empty space. Nothing came back. No plasma trail. No missile wake. No shield flare. No ship. Far beyond the Dominion's forward line, hidden in the black shadow of a dead mining belt, Captain Daniel Mercer stood on the command deck of the USS Providence and watched the same icons disappear from a very different screen. He was a white man in his early 40s with tired eyes, a day-old shave, and the kind of stillness people mistake for calm until they stand close enough to see the cost of it. His hands were folded behind his back because he did not want his crew to see them tighten. Nobody on that bridge was cheering. Nobody was smiling. Lieutenant Grace Walker sat at the sensor station, headset pressed tight against one ear, her other hand flat on the console, as if she could steady the whole ship by touching it. They still do not see us, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. Mercer heard it. Everyone heard it. He walked over, slow enough that it did not look like comfort, and rested one hand on the back of her chair. Breathe first, he said quietly. Then read the screen. Grace swallowed, nodded, and looked again. Confirmed. Dominion Command is increasing active scans. They think it is a system fault. On the far wall, Port Haven's night side turned into view. Mercer could see the colony lights, tiny and warm, scattered along the coast like porch lamps back home in Maine. Somewhere down there, families were in shelters, parents trying to sound brave, kids asking why the sky kept flashing. He hated that part most. Not the waiting, not the risk, the pretending. The way adults had to lie with soft voices when monsters came wearing uniforms. Admiral Bennett's order still sat in his memory, cold and simple. Do not reveal Providence until the Dominion commits fully. If they turn away early, they will come back with twice as many ships. Let them believe we are afraid. Let them step inside the door. On the Dominion flagship, another 12 icons vanished. This time the bridge went quiet. Korvac stared at the map, and for the first time that day, the Grand Fleet looked less like a hammer and more like something trapped under glass. Show me the enemy, he snapped. The sensor officer's mandibles trembled. Marshal, there is no enemy on scan. Back on Providence, Grace looked over her shoulder. Mercer did not raise his voice. He did not make a speech. He just looked at the row of young faces waiting for him to become what the moment needed. Continue, he said. 6 hours before the first Dominion ship disappeared, Ambassador Richard Cole sat alone beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Galactic War Tribunal with a cold cup of coffee in front of him and 300 alien governments watching him pretend not to be tired. The chamber was built to make small species feel smaller. The ceiling rose nearly 500 feet above the floor. The judges sat on floating black stone platforms. Every wall carried the carved names of worlds that had lost wars and called it diplomacy afterward. Cole had seen rooms like this before. Not as grand, maybe, but the feeling was the same. A room full of powerful people waiting for one tired man to blink first. Emperor Valor Threx stood at the center dais in ceremonial armor polished bright enough to catch every camera light. He did not look at Cole like an equal. He looked at him the way a landlord looks at a tenant who is already behind on rent. Humanity has been offered terms, Valor said, his voice rolling through the translation system. Your border colonies will accept Dominion protection. Your navy will disarm beyond the Mars line. Your government will transfer military authority to my marshals until your species learns restraint. A few delegates looked away. Most did nothing. That was the part Cole hated, though he would never show it. The silence of decent people who had calculated the cost of helping and found it too expensive. High Marshal Korvac appeared on the central display from the bridge of his flagship, the Crown of Ashes. Behind him, tactical officers moved with practiced confidence. Our fleet is in final position above Port Haven, Korvac said. 900 combat vessels. No meaningful Terran opposition detected. The word meaningful landed hard. Cole thought of the families in Port Haven, the school gyms converted into shelters, the hospital staff sleeping in shifts, the children being told it was only a drill because parents will say almost anything to keep fear out of a child's eyes. His face did not move. Valor stepped closer to his podium. Ambassador Cole, you will now confirm Earth's surrender before this tribunal. Do so cleanly, and your colony survives the day. Cole picked up his paper cup, found it empty, and set it down again. The tiny sound carried farther than it should have. Before I answer, he said, I need one clarification for the record. Valor's eyes narrowed. You are in no position to request anything. I understand. Cole opened the leather folder in front of him and clicked a real pen. Several alien delegates murmured at the old-fashioned sound. How many ships did you bring? For 1 second, the room did not understand him. Then laughter moved through the tribunal like a draft under a door. Valor smiled. Korvac openly sneered from the display. You ask because you hope the number is smaller than our claim, Korvac said. 900 human. Enough to darken your little colony's sky. Cole wrote the number down slowly. 900. Then he underlined it once. Thank you, Marshal. Valor's smile faded a little. That is all. Cole capped his pen and looked up. That is all I needed. On the display behind Korvac, the stars over Port Haven looked empty. Somewhere inside that emptiness, Captain Daniel Mercer and the crew of the Providence were already running dark, already listening, already waiting for the Empire to step all the way into the room and close the door behind itself. Inside the USS Providence, nobody felt like a legend. They felt like people sealed inside a dark metal city, 80 million miles from home, trying not to think about how many lives were balanced on a screen. The ship was running cold, which meant the lights on the command deck were dimmed to a soft amber. The air was a little too still, and every unnecessary system had been shut down to keep their thermal profile buried in the background noise of the mining belt. It made the bridge feel less like a warship and more like a hospital hallway at 3 in the morning. Lieutenant Grace Walker hated the quiet. Back at the academy in Colorado Springs, instructors had told her silence was discipline. Out here, silence felt like a hand around her ribs. She was 26 years old, from a small town outside Des Moines, and she had joined the Navy because her father used to point at the stars from their backyard and tell her that somebody decent needed to be out there when the bad days came. He had made it sound clean, noble. He had never mentioned the part where her palms would sweat so badly she had to wipe them on her uniform pants every few minutes. Sensor drift. Captain Daniel Mercer asked from behind her. Grace sat straighter. No, sir. Passive array is stable. Dominion forward elements are still moving toward Port Haven. Their scans are sweeping high and wide, but they are looking for active shields and plasma exhaust. They are not looking for us. Mercer nodded once. He looked calm from a distance, but up close Grace could see the small things. The tightness near his jaw. The way his eyes kept returning to the colony feed on the lower monitor. The way he held his coffee without drinking it. People called him steady. Grace was starting to understand steady did not mean unafraid. It meant afraid and still useful. How long until they crossed the anchor line? He asked. 14 minutes, Grace said. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. Maybe 13 if Korvac keeps pushing formation speed. At the tactical station, Commander Natalie Brooks muttered, He will. Men like that always think faster means stronger. Mercer glanced at her. Keep it clean, Commander. Yes, sir. She paused, then added, softer, sorry. Nobody blamed her. They had all watched the tribunal feed. They had all heard the Emperor talk about Port Haven like it was a bargaining chip instead of a place with grocery stores, soccer fields, dentists, tired nurses, and kids who still slept with night lights shaped like rockets. Mercer walked to the front of the bridge and keyed the internal channel. His voice reached every deck, every launch bay, every crew bunk where off-shift sailors were pretending to rest. "This is Captain Mercer. In a few minutes, the Dominion fleet will enter the engagement zone. You have trained for this. You know your stations. Nobody on this ship needs to be fearless. That is not the job. The job is to do the next right thing, carefully, and then the next one after that." He released the switch. No music swelled. No one cheered. A technician near the comms panel quietly crossed himself. Grace saw Mercer notice and saw him say nothing. That made her respect him more. A red line appeared across her screen. The first Dominion cruisers had crossed into the trap. Grace felt her heartbeat climb. "Captain," she said, forcing each word to stay level. "They are inside the anchor line." Mercer set his untouched coffee into the magnetic holder. He looked at the planet, then at the dark field where the Empire believed nothing was waiting. "All stations," he said, calm as a man closing his front door before a storm. "Hold fire until the last ship commits." The last Dominion ships crossed the anchor line at 12 minutes past Port Haven local midnight, and the USS Providence remained as dark as a stone at the bottom of the ocean. On Grace Walker's screen, 900 enemy vessels settled into the engagement zone in clean, confident layers, cruisers in front, carriers behind them, command ships in the center like royalty hiding behind servants. To the Dominion, the space around Port Haven looked empty. To Grace, it looked crowded with secrets. "Full commitment confirmed," she said. "No ships outside the field." Captain Mercer did not answer right away. He looked toward the forward display, where Providence herself was not shown as a proud, glowing icon. She was marked by a single dull gray outline, barely brighter than the background. That was the point. The ship had been built to be forgotten by every sensor that touched her. She was 3 miles from bow to stern, with launch bays stacked like parking garages, heat sinks buried behind armored shutters, and enough internal rail systems to move fighters, drones, and repair crews without lighting up a single external port. Alien admirals expected power to announce itself. They built warships that burned like cities, wrapped in glowing shields, singing through space with plasma wakes and thermal halos. Providence did none of that. Her engines were quiet. Her shields were down. Her weapons slept behind doors sealed tighter than bank vaults. For 19 days, she had drifted through a dead mining belt on momentum alone, hiding in dust, scrap metal, and frozen rock while the Dominion marched past her nose. Chief Engineer Paul Harlan's voice came through the bridge channel, low and rough from too much coffee. "Captain, heat banks are holding at 71%. We can stay cold for another 40 minutes before I have to start dumping warmth somewhere. And I would rather not explain to my crew why we cooked ourselves for dramatic effect." Mercer almost smiled. "Almost. Understood, Paul. Keep her quiet. Quiet is expensive, sir. So is losing a colony." There was a short pause. "Yes, sir." Grace listened to the exchange and felt something loosen in her chest. That was how humans handled fear, she thought. Not with speeches carved into monuments. With dry comments, bad coffee, and people doing impossible math under pressure because somebody else was counting on them. At the tactical station, Commander Brooks brought up a layered map of the battlefield. The debris cloud around Port Haven flickered with hidden markers that no Dominion system could see. Old shipping containers, dead satellites, broken or haulers, emergency beacons listed as inactive for months. Every one of them had been placed by human crews who smiled at port inspectors, filed boring maintenance forms, and left behind pieces of a trap so ordinary no empire bothered to question it. "Anchor network is awake but passive," Brooks said. "Relay mirrors are aligned. Drone wings are still cold." Mercer nodded. "No active emissions until my order." Grace watched a Dominion scout sweep its sensors directly across Providence. For half a second, her lungs forgot their job. The scan passed over them, recorded nothing, and moved on. The alien officer on the other end probably saw empty space. Maybe dust. Maybe a harmless chunk of old mining equipment. Not a city-sized human carrier with 7,000 people holding their breath inside it. "They looked right at us," Grace whispered. Mercer heard her. Most people only see what they believe can exist. On the Crown of Ashes, Korvac ordered his fleet to begin final intimidation formation, tightening the noose around Port Haven for the broadcast. On Providence, Daniel Mercer placed both hands on the rail in front of him and stared at the dark. Humanity had not built this ship to conquer anyone. They had built it for the day someone mistook restraint for permission. "Commander Brooks," he said quietly, "wake the outer mirrors." The first hidden machines opened their eyes in the dark. The outer mirrors woke without a sound, and for 3 long seconds nothing seemed to happen. That was the part Grace Walker would remember later, the terrible smallness of the moment before history changed. No thunder, no warning sirens, no heroic music, just a handful of old machines turning in the dark, lining themselves up around Port Haven like porch lights on a street where every neighbor had quietly come outside. On the Dominion flagship, High Marshal Korvac watched his fleet tighten formation for the surrender broadcast. He wanted the people of Port Haven to look up and see order. Dominion order. 900 ships arranged in perfect rings above their world, each one a message that said resistance was childish, independence was temporary, and Earth was too far away to save them. "Open the public channel," Korvac said. His communications officer bowed. "To the colony only, Marshal? To Earth as well. Let them hear how quickly pride becomes begging." Across the battlefield, that signal washed over Providence in a clean, arrogant wave. Lieutenant Grace Walker watched the waveform appear on her screen and felt her stomach twist. "Captain, he is broadcasting to civilian shelters." Mercer's face changed by almost nothing, but the bridge felt it anyway. The air seemed to harden. "Put it on internal audio." Korvac's translated voice filled the command deck, smooth and cruel in the way of people who have never had to doubt their own safety. "Citizens of Port Haven, your government has failed you. Lay down your loyalty to Earth, and the Dominion will permit your continued existence under Imperial protection." No one on Providence spoke. Somewhere behind Grace, a young navigation tech whispered, "Permit?" Like he could not believe a living person had used that word about families hiding under a city. Mercer let the broadcast continue for 2 more seconds, just long enough for every deck on his ship to hear it. Then he said, "Mute him." The voice vanished. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with every reason they were there. Mercer turned to Commander Brooks. "First cut. Communications relay cruiser on the outer ring. Disable only. I want their fleet confused, not panicked yet." Brooks repeated the order, her voice steady. "Disable only. Relay cruiser. Outer ring." Down in the forward launch spine, a rail lance platform shifted 1 inch into alignment. The weapon did not glow. It did not roar. It simply used math, mass, and patience. A tungsten dart no wider than a baseball left Providence at a speed the Dominion's defensive computers had never been taught to respect. On the tactical map, the relay cruiser blinked from green to gray. Its engines stayed intact. Its crew compartments stayed pressurized. Its broadcast tower went dark. Grace stared at the result. Target disabled. No secondary damage. Mercer nodded once. Good. No one cheered. He had made that rule years ago after his first real deployment, when a man beside him had celebrated too early and then spent the rest of his life remembering that the other side had mothers too. "People are still on those ships," Mercer said, not loudly, but loud enough. "We in the threat. We do not enjoy it." Grace looked back at her screen and saw the Dominion formation ripple as officers tried to understand what had happened. Their scans flared brighter, sweeping wider, searching for a shooter that did not appear. Korvac's flagship increased active sensor output by 20%, then 30%. To the Dominion, it was a show of strength. To Providence, it was a porch light turning on in a dark yard. Commander Brooks looked over her shoulder. "Captain, the flagship is painting half the system." Mercer kept his eyes on the map. "Let him." Grace watched new targeting lines appear, thin and pale, connecting the hidden mirrors one by one. The trap was no longer sleeping. It was stretching. And out there, in the middle of his perfect fleet, High Marshal Korvac still believed the first lost ship had been an accident. High Marshal Korvac did not believe in invisible enemies. In his world, power had shape. It had banners, engine flares, command codes, parade formations, and bright weapons mounted where frightened species could see them. So when the relay cruiser went dark and his officers told him there was no attacker on scan, His first thought was not fear. It was insult. Run the diagnostic again, he ordered. The sensor officer bent over the console, so fast his claws scraped the edge. Third diagnostic is complete, Marshal. The system reports no internal fault. Then the system is wrong. Korvac stepped down from his command platform, each armored footfall echoing through the crown of ashes. On the tactical wall, the disabled cruiser sat gray and silent at the edge of the formation, like a missing tooth in a perfect smile. Human machines fail. Dominion machines do not. No one answered. That made him angrier. He pointed at the map of Port Haven. They have ground stations. Old defense platforms. Cargo drones with rifles welded to them. Find the source and erase it from the board. His weapons officer hesitated. Marshal, if we fire blind near the colony, we risk damaging assets the Emperor wishes to claim. Korvac turned slowly. The Emperor wishes to claim obedience. The buildings are negotiable. The officer lowered his gaze and returned to his station. Across the dark field, aboard Providence, Grace Walker watched the Dominion scans spike again. Their beams swept across dead satellites, or haulers, shipping containers, and empty rock, missing the truth because the truth had been built to look boring. They are increasing skin power again, she said. Wide spectrum, active pulse. They are lighting up every relay mirror we placed. Commander Brooks leaned closer to her display. He is trying to scare the dark into answering. Captain Mercer stood behind the command rail, his face lit by pale lines of moving data. Let the mirrors catch it. Do not answer yet. Grace nodded, then noticed a new cluster forming near the Dominion Center. 3 cruiser groups are changing position. They are moving between us and the colony. Shielding the flagship? Brooks asked. Grace shook her head. No, they are looking outward. They still think the threat is somewhere beyond the ring. Mercer exhaled through his nose. He had seen that kind of mistake on training fields, in staff meetings, and once in a hurricane evacuation back in Florida when a man kept staring at the ocean while the floodwater came up through the street behind him. Some people could not accept danger unless it approached from the direction they had chosen. Second cut, Mercer said. Sensor picket group. Disable arrays only. Brooks repeated the order. A second rail lance platform aligned. 3 dormant mirrors caught the firing solution and bent it around the debris field. On the Dominion map, 5 picket ships lost their scanning arrays within the same breath. No hull breach. No fireball. Just blindness. Korvac watched 5 more icons fade to gray, and the bridge of the crown of ashes went so quiet he could hear the soft clicking of nervous mandibles. That was coordinated, the sensor officer whispered before he could stop himself. Korvac crossed the room in 2 strides. Say that clearly. The officer froze. Marshal, the timing suggests a single command system. Where? Unknown. That is not a location. On Providence, Grace saw the flagship open every active sensor band at once. The crown of ashes poured energy into space, furious and bright, demanding that the universe explain itself. Her console filled with clean targeting data. Distance, angle, mass, command emissions, shield rhythm, engine temperature. For the first time all night, the Dominion flagship was not a symbol. It was a measurement. Grace looked back at Mercer, her voice barely above a whisper. Captain, he just lit himself up. Mercer closed his eyes for 1 second. Not because he doubted the order, because he understood it. Every person on that enemy bridge had a name somewhere. Every person under Port Haven had one too. He opened his eyes. Mark the flagship, he said. But hold. I want Korvac to understand the shape of the room before we close the door. Korvac finally did what every proud commander does 1 minute too late. He ordered space itself to get out of his way. All wings, break formation, he snapped. Pull back to the northern slip lane. Rebuild at distance. We will return when our sensors are clean. The crown of ashes transmitted the command across the fleet, sharp and absolute. But the answer that came back was not obedience. It was confusion. One cruiser captain reported engine drag where there should have been none. A carrier group said their navigation computers were correcting in circles. 2 destroyer squadrons tried to turn north and found their course bending gently back toward Port Haven, like marbles rolling inside a bowl. Korvac stared at the map. Why are they not moving? The navigation officer worked so quickly his hands blurred. There is a gravity distortion across the lane. From what? Unknown, Marshal. That word was beginning to sound like treason. Far across the field, Grace Walker watched the hidden anchor network come alive one quiet node at a time. Old cargo haulers that had supposedly lost their engines months ago unfolded internal mass cores. Inactive weather satellites woke beneath coats of dust and ice. Mining containers parked along useless orbits adjusted their angles by fractions of a degree. Nothing looked like a weapon. That was what made it work. The Dominion had flown through a junkyard and never once asked who had arranged the junk. Anchor field is stable, Grace said. Northern slip lane is denied. Eastern and western lanes are narrowing. Commander Brooks looked toward Captain Mercer. They're going to realize this is not a ship engagement. Mercer nodded. Good. That is the lesson. Brooks studied him for a second. You want them scared? No, Mercer said. I want them careful. On the Dominion flagship, Korvac was neither. He ordered a full burn through the northern lane. 3 heavy cruisers pushed their drives to maximum, engines bright enough to wash the nearby ships in white light. For a moment, it looked like brute force might work. Then the gravity anchors pulled their trajectories sideways with calm, invisible patience, and the cruisers drifted off course, systems overloaded, engines automatically shutting down to protect their crews. They were not destroyed. They were stopped. That made Korvac angrier than losing them. Destruction, he understood. Restraint felt like mockery. They are playing with us, he growled. His first officer said nothing, but his eyes stayed fixed on the tactical wall, where the perfect Dominion formation had become a crowded room with no door. Another message came in from the outer ring. Marshal, we have detected human relay traffic. Korvac spun toward him. Where? The officer brought up the image. The screen filled with useless objects, dead satellites, shipping crates, emergency buoys, broken or skiffs, frozen scraps from a mining operation abandoned before the war began. Then one by one, thin lines connected them into a web around the fleet. The first officer whispered, the debris field. Korvac felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. They had not been ambushed by a hidden gun. They had parked their entire grand fleet inside a machine. On Providence, Grace heard a soft laugh from someone at the rear of the bridge. Not happy, not cruel, just disbelieving. Mercer turned his head, and the sound stopped immediately. Stay professional, he said. Then, more gently, I know. But stay professional. Grace looked at the screen and understood why the person had laughed. For weeks, Dominion inspectors had watched human repair crews move through Port Haven orbit. Men and women in orange work suits, hauling parts, welding frames, complaining about overtime, eating sandwiches out of foil wrappers. The Empire had seen workers. It had not seen soldiers. It had seen garbage. It had not seen geometry. It had seen a frightened colony. It had not seen patience. Commander Brooks brought up the final layer. Drone wings are ready. Interceptors are ready. We can blind the remaining command ships and lock their launch bays on your order. Mercer looked once at Port Haven, then at the Dominion fleet trapped above it. His voice stayed low. Disable command and propulsion. Leave life support alone. Open a rescue corridor for any vessel that powers down. Brooks repeated it exactly. Grace sent the order through the mirror network and across the battlefield. The dark around the Empire began to move with human precision. Korvac watched his outer ships go gray, one after another, not exploding, not vanishing, simply losing the ability to threaten anyone. For the first time in his career, the High Marshal lowered his voice. Show me the human vessel. The censor officer swallowed hard. Marshal, I think the vessel was never the trap. The moment came quietly, because Captain Daniel Mercer refused to waste power on theater. Open thermal shutters, he said. Bring the outer hull to visible profile. No weapons bloom. No intimidation pass. Just let them see us. Down the length of Providence, armored shutters slid back from heat sinks the size of apartment blocks. Cold running lights came alive in thin white strips along the carrier's spine. Launch bay doors unsealed one level at a time, not roaring open, not throwing fire, just revealing depth after depth of hangars, repair decks, drone racks, and silent rail platforms tucked inside the dark body of the ship. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked less like a vessel turning on and more like a city waking up after a blackout. Grace Walker watched the Dominion sensors finally catch the shape. First they saw a mass where no mass should have been, then a thermal outline, then a hull 3 miles long sitting in the shadow of the mining belt, close enough that half their fleet had flown past it without noticing. Her screen filled with urgent enemy scans, overlapping so fast they became noise. "They see us," she said. Her own voice sounded strange to her, smaller than the moment. Mercer nodded. "Broadcast identification." Commander Brooks looked over. "Open channel. Fleet-wide. Clear language. No threats." Brooks sent the signal. Across the trapped Dominion formation, every functioning receiver carried the same calm, human voice from the Bridge of Providence. "Dominion vessels. This is Captain Daniel Mercer of the Terran Navy. Your command and propulsion systems are being disabled. Your life support will not be targeted. Power down your weapons and hold position. Rescue corridors are open for medical and emergency craft. Do not make this harder for your people." On the crown of ashes, Korvac stood frozen in front of the display. For several seconds, he did not speak. He could not force the image in front of him to fit inside the world he understood. Human ships were supposed to be blunt, noisy things. Human courage was supposed to be stubbornness wrapped around inferior machines. This was neither. This was patience built into steel. This was a whole battlefield folded inside one shadow. His first officer whispered, "Marshal, it was there before we arrived." Korvac turned on him, but the anger did not land. The words had already entered the room and changed it. It was there before we arrived. The Grand Fleet had not been hunted down by a charging enemy. It had been studied, measured, allowed to step forward, and then gently, methodically disarmed. Korvac looked back at the map. More ships were turning gray, their weapons locked, engines quieted, crews alive but unable to move. The human carrier did not chase them. It did not need to. "Fire on that vessel," Korvac said, but the order came out thin. The weapons officer stared at his controls. "Marshal, primary batteries are locked out. Secondary batteries are cycling errors. We have no clean firing solution." "Then ram it." No one moved. That was the first real crack in the Empire. Not the lost ships. Not the closed slip lanes. The silence of officers who realized obedience had become meaningless. On Providence, Grace saw the flagship attempt to reroute propulsion through emergency channels. Crown of Ashes is trying a manual drive override. Mercer looked at Brooks. "Stop the drive. Leave the lights on." A mirror relay pulsed once. The flagship's engines dimmed and settled into stillness. No blast. No spectacle. Just a giant brought to a halt. Mercer watched the enemy command ship drift, then looked at the colony feed below. Port Haven still glowed along the coast, fragile and stubborn and alive. "Open a direct channel to Korvac," he said. The connection took 2 seconds. Korvac appeared on the forward screen, towering, armored, furious, and for the first time uncertain. Mercer did not sit. He did not salute. He simply met the alien commander's eyes. "Marshal," he said, "your fleet is finished. Your people are alive because we chose restraint. Do not make me explain that twice." Korvac stared through the open channel as if anger alone might push the human carrier back into the dark. For most of his life, his uniform had done half his speaking for him. The armor, the rank marks, the history of conquered systems behind his name. Now none of it reached across the screen. Captain Daniel Mercer stood on the Providence Bridge in a plain dark uniform, tired eyes fixed on him, one hand resting near a cup of coffee gone cold. He looked less like a conqueror than a man who had been forced to stay late at a job nobody should have to do. "You hide behind tricks," Korvac said. Mercer did not blink. "You aim 900 ships at a colony." Korvac's mouth opened, but no answer came quickly enough. On the war tribunal floor, 6 hours and a lifetime away from the first insult, Ambassador Richard Cole watched the same live feed appear above the Emperor's dais. The laughter in the chamber died so completely that the old man could hear the tiny buzz of the lights above his table. Emperor Valar Threx turned slowly toward the screen. His grand fleet, the pride of the Dominion, floated above Port Haven with engines quiet, weapons locked, and human rescue craft moving calmly between disabled vessels. No celebration, no humiliation parade, just control, just restraint, just the terrible dignity of people who had every reason to be cruel and chose not to be. Valar gripped the edge of his podium. "This feed is fabricated." Cole closed his folder. "No, Your Majesty. It is documented. You expect the Dominion to accept terms from a species that attacks from shadows." Cole stood, his knees stiff from too many years in chairs built by species with different bones. He slid a thin document across the table. I expect you to read. Vaylor looked down at it with open contempt. And what is this? Surrender terms. Withdrawal from Port Haven orbit. Return of all occupied border traffic. Recognition of Terran colony sovereignty. Medical corridors for your crews. No reprisals against officers who power down. The Emperor let out a bitter sound. You spare our sailors and call it mercy? Cole's face did not soften, but his voice did. No. Mercy would have been leaving Port Haven alone. Above the colony, Korvac finally gave the order no Dominion Marshal had ever given in public. All vessels, power down remaining systems. The words moved through the fleet slowly, painfully, but they moved. One by one, the last hostile markers faded to neutral gray. On Providence, nobody cheered. Grace Walker took off her headset and pressed both hands over her face for a second, not crying exactly, just letting her body catch up with the fact that she was still alive, and so were the people below. Mercer saw her shoulders shake and looked away, giving her the privacy every scared young officer deserves. Commander Brooks said quietly, Port Haven reports shelters intact. Civilian comms are coming back. Mercer nodded, but for a moment he could not speak. The colony lights were still there, small and stubborn along the coast, like every porch lamp his mother used to leave on when he came home late. He thought about the children under those lights, about parents who would now have to explain that the sky was safe again, about all the ordinary mornings that had nearly been stolen and would now arrive on schedule. Breakfast, school buses, bad coffee, bills, soccer practice, life in all its small, annoying glory. Grace lowered her hands. Captain, what do we tell Earth? Mercer looked at the screen where the disabled fleet drifted in silence. Tell them Port Haven is still standing. She waited, fingers above the keys. Anything else? He thought about it for one more breath. Tell them restraint held. Back in the tribunal, Cole picked up his cold coffee, tasted it, and made a face because some things remained disappointing even after history turned. Vaylor stood motionless before the terms, no longer roaring, no longer certain. Around him, the galaxy watched humanity differently. Not because humans had built the largest ship in the dark. Not because they had trapped an empire without being seen. But because, when the door closed and the stronger hand finally belonged to Earth, humanity did not become the monster the Empire expected. It became the line the Empire should never have crossed.